Hi Booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I'm going to be wrapping up everything that I read in January, and then I'll go through some of my plans for February. January's been a pretty good reading month. It's got my reading off to a good start this year. I'll go through those 8 books that I read before going on to what I'm still reading at the moment, and some of my plans for February. Most of them have already been mentioned, and I've discussed them in random reading update videos. So what I'll do is I'll leave a link to those 2 videos down in the description, and I'll try to put in brackets which books are discussed in which video, so that if it sounds interesting, you can find that book and hopefully hear me talking a bit more about it. First off, and I still find it a bit funny that this was the first book that I finished this year. It's The Story of Craft Beer by Pete Brown, a tiny little thing that I'm still counting as a book I read, since it does have an ISBN, and it's a tiny. I mean, there's pictures on almost every page, every other page, so it's it doesn't take any time at all to read, but just an intriguing look into the history of beer, and particularly the craft beer phenomenon, and the kind of things that are being done, how it sort of taps into the heritage of brewing beer, but then also how they're doing new things and experimenting. So I found it quite intriguing. As I've said before, I'm not sure how much is in that you wouldn't get just by googling it, but it was good, and the writer Pete Brown was he was very energetic, I suppose, in the way he writes. Then next up was Wallace Stevens, his selected poems. Me and Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics were planning a bit of a read along for this. It was a bit loose, and I'm not entirely sure how well it worked, but we're still hoping to talk about some poems, so it'll be still going on quite informally. But for me, just going through these poems again, I felt like I understand him a bit better, I suppose, with the second reading. And I realised I sort of changed the construction of that sentence as I was saying it. My tenses all got mixed up. But yeah, for a while I didn't really know what to think of Wallace Stevens, whereas now I'm finding it a little less odd when he's just being a bit weird and a bit silly, and realising that's actually part of it, and something that you can really relish in his poetry. And yes, some interesting insights, I suppose, into ideas of subjectivity and objectivity. I'm intrigued to read more of his poetry. Then we've got Ovid, the Metamorphoses, which was a lot of fun. It's a contender for the best book of the month. Maybe that's something I should do. Maybe I should have I should decide which was the best and have a little battle like that. So it kind of comes joint first, I think, for me, with the next book, which is Border by Kapka, Kassabova. Kapka, Kassabova. You can't quite see the writing because it's there we go. That's a bit better. A book about the borders between Turkey, Bulgaria, and Greece, and about the people who live in the kind of border regions of those countries, what it's like for them, how their identities have shifted. I was turned on to this book by Aaron from Aaron Read a Book, and actually in the reading update that where I discussed both of these books, he reminded me of, there's a story of a family who they're Syrian refugees in, are they in Turkey? I want to say they're in Turkey, and essentially they could be in the refugee camp, but they've still got some reserves left. They've still got some money left from, I presume, selling their home and furniture and whatever. So, they're using, the last of their savings to live in a flat, and then trying to work out how to fund, how to pay for, various members of the family to get out of Turkey and into other countries where they hope they'll be safer. And they were just such a really, they were just a really hospitable and lovely family, and it was just kind of staggering, really, that that they're just as hospitable in that situation as they would have been in their home, and although they're in dire straits, they're not, they don't ignore other people, and they don't decide not to help other people where they can, which, yeah, just sort of blew me away, because I would hope that I would, I would make similar decisions if I was in the same position, but can't count on it, and I'm not sure if everyone would. And yeah, it was just a really sort of special moment in the book, and Aaron said he was blown away by it as well. Next up, we've got Zbigniew Herbert, selected poems. Like with Wallace Stevens, this was a bit of a reread, and I was sort of reassessing the poet. I think not much, it wasn't quite the same as with Wallace Stevens, where I didn't know what to make of the poet. With Herbert, I think I enjoyed him. I just sort of forgotten what he was like, and he hadn't stuck with me as much. And yet, on rereading many of the poems, they're really, really powerful. They're right up my street. Often quite experimental, often quite bleak. A lot of classical references, but some of them are just very immediate. So there's a nice balance there between being referential and being sort of sincere and in the moment. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'll be reading him again, hopefully maybe some more by him. And as I said last time, this edition is really falling apart, so I'll see what I can do to keep this one going, until I can maybe replace it in the future. And then the last one that was covered in my reading wrap up, and I appreciate I've been yattering on and I haven't even got to the books that I haven't really discussed yet, was H.G. Wells' A Short History of the World, which basically is what it says on the tin, and I in some way enjoyed it. It's sort of at the bottom of the pile, not quite at the very bottom, but it's kind of towards the bottom of the pile for me of what I've read so far this year, mainly just because of the restrictions of what he's trying to do with this, and sometimes I felt like Wells's optimism for human potential, although a certain amount of optimism is necessary, maybe sometimes blinded him a little bit, or blinkered him. That was the impression I got. I will be attempting to read a few more books sort of like this. The next one will be The World, A Family History by Simon Sebag Montefiore. I was originally planning to read that along with Wells, sort of leapfrogging between the two throughout the year, but I started on Wells and realised that it wouldn't really work. So at some point I'll get to Montefiore. I might wait a month or so before I start. And then 2 books that I've finished since that reading update that I made. A book of poems and a novel. The poetry book, I don't want to say it took me by surprise, because I wouldn't quite be fair, but I did find it quite exciting and fun, and I don't know, that there were just moments in this collection that I wasn't quite expecting. It's called A Marginal Sea by Zoë Skalding. I'd sort of heard a name before in sort of poetry circles, and this is her first book with Carson Press, I think. So she was with a Welsh publisher called Seren, which is why that I'd sort of heard of her before. And I don't know, I read the first few poems and liked them, and sort of expected that it would sort of stay the same, and instead, particularly by the third poem, which is a prose poem called A Rose for Rosa, there's this sort of experimentation there that doesn't feel gratuitous. Instead, there's a kind of sense of glee to the whole thing. And maybe it's just me and the way I was coming at the poems, I'm not entirely sure. But I'd like to reread this collection at some point. A fair bit of it about sort of trans maritime relationships, I suppose, or with it being called a marginal sea, and the idea of coastal areas being almost transient, being sort of between places, being tidal in a way, that sort of push and pull, and a lot of this is on the back, and it makes it sound like it's not really about anything, and in a way, you'd be right to come to that conclusion in a way, because many of the poems are sort of playing with that idea, but not all of them are, and actually some of the ones that aren't were some of my favourites. Like towards the end, a poem called During the Works, which is sort of a translation of an Apollinaire poem, but not quite. And I just found that really fun. And one of the last poems, I think the second to last poem, called Hello Moon, which again is a sort of translation after Le Forgue. I'm not entirely sure if that's how you say his name. Which is one of those poems that just seems so celebratory, and it's and celebratory just for the world and just for things being, which I don't know. Sometimes that there are poems, particularly contemporary poems, that feel celebratory, but not in this way and not with such relish. So I really quite enjoyed this. I'll be rereading it, and I would I'd recommend it for anyone who wants to dip their toe into the waters of contemporary poetry, and the pun was intended. And then finally for January, I read a book I've been meaning to get to for ages, and it's one of the big books that I wanted to read this year. So I made the Beefcake booktube challenge, and I've managed to get 2 of them in January. One was the Metamorphoses, the other was The Good Soldier Svejk by Jaroslav Hašek, which is just a farcical novel, about one soldier's experience in the First World War. And you might hear that, you might think it's all very real and very gritty. It's I haven't read All Quiet on the Western Front yet. I'd like to get to it soon, but it's about as far away from that as you can get. You get to the end of the book. There hasn't been any like the battalion that our main character is a part of. They haven't even got to the trenches yet. They're like none of the stuff that you associate with World War One, with the exception of maybe Austro-Hungarian mismanagement and the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and Sophie at the beginning. None of that, like none of the other stuff, is there at all. It's just a long, just a long trail of mishaps and misunderstandings, and Svejk getting himself into trouble, quite often into the regimental prison, and it's just funny, but in a really sometimes there is a bit of a sharp edge to it. Sometimes it's just very good natured and very human, and so that's really what I loved about this. I think if you enjoy stuff like the Marx Brothers or Charlie Chaplin, and sort of that kind of very slapstick humour, then I think you'd get along fine with this. Just the opening, which is Svejk at home talking with his charwoman, and as the illustration is showing us, he's rubbing down his legs because he's got rheumatism. And here we go. And if there's any swearing, I'll bleep it out or whatever. And so they've killed our Ferdinand, said the charwoman to Svejk, who had left military service years before, after having been finally certified by an army medical board as an imbecile, and now lived by selling dogs, ugly mongrel monstrosities whose pedigree he forged. I still just find it so funny. Yeah, that our main character is someone who's been, and I mean, there's a kind of cruel side to it at the same time. But yeah, he's been dismissed for imbecility, and is now a really dodgy dog dealer. Yeah, it's just brilliant. There's another bit, see if I can find it. He's on a train in the compartment with his lieutenant. He's the Batman to his lieutenant, and they're in there, and there's been a mix-up, and there's this one other person in there who turns out to be an army inspector, but he doesn't realise that in time, and he gets himself into trouble. Which, yeah, I just love. But yeah, just the first bit of that bit was quite funny as well. See if I can find it. In a second-class compartment of the Prague České Budějovice Express, there were 3 people: Lieutenant Lukáš, an elderly gentleman opposite with a completely bald pate, and Švejk, who stood modestly at the door to the corridor and was just braving himself to receive a new volley of oaths from Lieutenant Lukáš, who, disregarding the presence of the bald civilian, kept thundering at Švejk throughout the journey that he was the Almighty's choicest quadruped, and so on. It all concerned a mere trifle, the number of pieces of luggage which Švejk was supposed to be looking after. "So they've stolen one of our cases, have they?" the lieutenant reproached Švejk. "Anyone can say that." Humbly report, sir," Švejk put in gently. "They really did steal it. On the station there are always a lot of crooks like that knocking about, and I imagine that one of them undoubtedly took a liking to your case. This chap undoubtedly took advantage of the moment when I slipped away from our luggage to tell you that everything was all right with it. He probably stole our case just at that favourable opportunity. They're always waiting for such an opportunity, you know. 2 years ago, At the Northwest Station, they robbed a young lady of a pram and a little girl in swaddling clothes, and were so decent as to hand the little girl to the police station in our street, saying that they had found her abandoned in the carriage entrance. Then the press tried to make out that the poor young lady was an unnatural mother, and Švejk underlined, at stations there always have been thefts and always will be. It can't be otherwise. I'm convinced, Švejk, the lieutenant put in, that one day you'll come to a really sticky end. I still don't know whether you're just pretending to be a mule or whether you were born one. What was in the suitcase? Nothing in particular, really, sir, answered Svejk, keeping his eyes fixed on the bald cranium of the civilian opposite, who appeared to take no interest whatsoever in the whole business, and went on reading his new free press. In the whole suitcase there was only the mirror from the sitting room and the iron clothes rack from the hall, so we've really not suffered any loss at all, because the mirror and the clothes rack both belonged to the landlord. Yeah, and it just goes on, and I've probably read too much, but yeah, if that sounds like your cup of tea, then yeah, feel free to give it a go. I thought it was delightful, and it'll be one of those books that I go back to as a kind of comfort read, I think, if I just want something to chuckle along to. You know, it's 600, well, nearly 700, no, like 750 pages long, but it doesn't quite feel like that. It reads quite quickly. It's very funny. The only thing it's not really got going for it is that it never really goes anywhere. It just stops. You feel like it could have kept on going much longer. So that's The Good Soldier's Fake, and that's everything that I finished in January. I'm still currently reading a few things. So my sort of ongoing project, probably for the whole year, is to read all the way through these two really, really big books. The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton, and the complete essays of Michel de Montaigne. I don't really know how much time to go into sort of letting you know what I think of them so far, whether I should do that, whether I should do a series of dedicated videos, to give it a little, just to give you a little bit of an idea, I suppose. I feel like at the moment I feel like I'm understanding more from Montaigne. I'm suspecting possibly for two things. One is that, you know, this is a collection of essays. They're often relatively short, and it's also a modern translation. So it's, you know, it's been translated into modern English, so it's just easier to understand for a modern reader. Whereas on the other hand, this is one long running thing, which now finally there's like a 130 page long sort of author's preface called Democritus to the Reader, where he's going through his reasons for putting this together, why he's calling himself Democritus Junior, and that's because I think in antiquity Democritus was once found under a tree dissecting animals to find out how they worked, and he wants to do the same thing. He wants to dissect melancholy, and hence the title, An Anatomy of Melancholy, to work out how it works, how it can be treated, how it can be prevented. And he spends 130 pages explaining that. But I'm finally at the section where there are these larger sections broken down into subsections, so these tiny little arguments, these tiny little sort of tributaries that he's going off on. So yeah, I might, by the end of next month, I might have a little more to say about Burton. There is a really intriguing bit he has about utopian societies, and how So like with Plato, he's trying to work out in the Republic what like a just person might look like, and so he says, well, we'll have to work out what a just society looks like, and so that's sort of how they come up with the Republic, sort of one of the first utopias, and he's sort of taking a similar tack there, I suppose, to sort of work out what sickness looks like, or what does a sick society look like, what does a good society look like, and he sort of goes into why utopias never work, or that they are just sort of fancies, and that they never, you can't really put them into practice, but that they're useful, I suppose, and it's an interesting take on them, and I suppose, like Plato, it's an interesting way to use them to work out I suppose with Plato, it's more of a working out a positive. For Burton, it's more of a negative. What plagues our society, and what do we need to keep it healthy? It is his, sort of in the back of his head, I think, as he's going through it. So yeah, intriguing stuff. I don't understand a lot of it, but I'll say that just on a prose level, I love reading Burton. It's a lot of fun just spending time with him on the page. I love the way he writes, and I think just how ornamental his sentences are. Whereas, with sort of more modern stuff, I can understand it, but there's less there to luxuriate in. Both Burton and Montaigne have been a lot of fun. As a personality, I think I prefer Montaigne, although I'm trying to, that's another thing I'm trying to work out as I'm reading them. Which one do I prefer, and who's the biggest snob out of the two of them? So I suppose wait and see on that one. And then also, I've recently, just in the last couple of days, picked up a couple of books. I've picked up A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos, which is a French sort of YA fantasy kind of thing. Who's it translated by? I'm not doing a very good job with translations today. It's translated by Hildegard Searle, and it's about a world where there's been this big rupture, so that all the various countries, societies, are like these different fragments floating around, and they need airships to get from one to the other. And our main character, Ophelia, at the beginning of the book, has been told that she's got to marry someone from this other. They call them arcs, the sort of different fragments. She's got to marry this guy from this other arc, who is basically like a distant, frozen, barren wasteland. And so she's quite concerned about that. It seems like these kinds of political arranged marriages seem to be the done thing in this society. But the other intriguing thing is that most of the characters seem to have some kind of, I suppose, magical ability. It hasn't really been explained all that much, and actually only really two or three of the characters have been shown to use them. So the main character, Ophelia, she has two. She can read objects, so if she touches them with her skin, or with a particular kind of pair of gloves, she can sort of read the history of the people who have owned it. And so before this proposed marriage, she's working in a museum, so it's sort of the perfect employment for someone with that kind of ability. But the other ability that she has is that she can travel through mirrors. And since the series is the Mirror Visitor series, I'm guessing that that's going to play more of a role later. And it's really only in the first scene of the book that's been shown that that's something that she can do. It's been talked about, and the significance of these powers, why people have them. Do some people not have them, and why don't they have them? Questions like that I'm still trying to work out. But yeah, there seem to be sort of storm clouds on the horizon. So I'll let you know what I think of it once I've finished it. And I've also just started reading this selection of writings by Stevie Smith, a rather eccentric, but I don't know. I think unappreciated is the wrong word, but I think there probably is like a depth to her writing that is people just don't look for it because she's quite eccentric, I suppose. And so I'm only a few pages in, but yeah, I'm sort of looking forward to getting to know her writing a bit better, because I've read a few of her poems here and there, so I want to get to know her a bit better. So that's what I'm reading at the moment. I don't have too many plans for February. I'll carry on with those four. I probably won't read all of the Mirror Visitor books all in one go, unless I really enjoy A Winter's Promise, and so I'm not putting any of them down. There are another 3 books in that series, but there are a couple of books that were in the book haul, the kind of post-Christmas book haul, that I wanted to include, and I wanted to try and read in February. One of them is The Woman Who Borrowed Memories by Tove Jansson, her selected stories. I've only read her Moomin stuff, so I'm excited to read some of her writing for grown-ups. I'd like to read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. As with the exception of maybe one or 2 writers, I haven't really read much environmental non-fiction. Then The Conference of Birds, or Conference of the Birds, by Farid ud-Din Attar. It's only now looking at it that it seems appropriate that it's published by Penguin. And then I was just looking at my shelves and thinking of what other poetry might I want to read in the coming months, and that there's loads of poetry that there's a fair bit of poetry on my shelves I haven't read yet, and instead I'm just gravitating back to reread these selected poems of John Ashberry, and there's tons of poetry that I could go to for the first time, whether it's older poets by who were living in the 18th, 19th century, or I could be reading I've got stuff by contemporary poets who are still alive and that I'm sort of putting off for no reason whatsoever, other than I keep getting distracted by things, and John Ashberry is one of those things. I really loved reading his selected poems back in September, and I still don't understand a lot of it, I suppose, but just the sort of feeling I got as I was reading him, and the excitement I had, I think, for encountering him, has sort of stayed with me a bit, and so I might just go straight back to him and yeah, sort of put off some other poetry plans. So we'll see. But that's kind of what I'm thinking at the moment. I also have some very loose plans to, I don't know, I haven't read any Albert Camus for ages. Maybe I'll read something by Albert Camus. It's been maybe 2 years since I've read anything by him. And even longer for Sartre, I think. I keep meaning to go and read some Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, short stories. Maybe an Icelandic saga or something. So yeah, I'm keeping things relatively open. If you were to sort of look back at, well, actually, I didn't really do much of a plan for January, I don't think. But very little was planned in January, and it might stay the same. And I might change plans and not read any of the proposed books. So we'll see how it goes. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've had a good January. It's been at least been as good as you could make it. But for now, yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.